Cardinal News is telling the little-known stories of Virginia's role in our country's march to independence. As we head toward America's 250th anniversary, we'll examine the events, people, and places that shaped the Commonwealth and the nation. Together we can better understand the role of our ancestors beyond what's in the history books. This is Cardinal 250, made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission.
Hello and welcome to Cardinal News 250. I'm Dutchie Jesse. I want to thank you for listening. Cardinal News 250 is sponsored by Bank of Botetourt, focused on you. And this project is made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission. Well, if you read Cardinal News 250 or have been listening to the podcast, you know our focus is on telling the little-known stories of Virginia figures as our nation was formed, and we have been publishing Cardinal 250 for a while now. We're about a year away from the big anniversary, the 250th birthday of America, and I thought we would take an opportunity now to look back at everything we've covered, not every single thing, but lots of highlights, and I figured a really good person for that would be our founding editor, Dwayne Yancey. Hello, Dwayne. Welcome to the Cardinal News 250 pod.
Glad to be here, and I should point out that if we were doing this in 1775 and not 2025, then Bogota County would have extended all the way to the Mississippi.
And that's the kind of context we're looking for, Dwayne. That's why we're talking to you. You've been on the other podcast. We do have a weekly podcast that's news-based. This one is more of a history podcast. And you're the key person from our team to talk to about this because you're very closely involved with our Cardinal 250 project. What is it you do?
I make sure it happens every month. Every month we have several stories about, as you say, the little-known aspects of Virginia's role in the Revolution. And then we have a newsletter that accompanies that and also a podcast.
Yeah, so you build out the newsletter.
Yeah.
And it's once a month. It comes out on Tuesdays, usually the second Tuesday, give or take. And there's no shortage of material. Am I right? I mean, it is history, but how has it been finding the material, knowing that the mission is about, the things we maybe didn't learn about in school?
It has been surprisingly easy. Now, I've brought some props here
Yay,
with me.
You get extra credit.
That will not matter for the audio listeners, but for the video listeners, they will. So the first prop is my 7th grade history textbook.
Do you still have that?
I still have this, yes. Don't ask me how I acquired this. Some stories are better not told.
Yeah.
But for those who cannot see this, on the cover we have George Washington there on horseback, and then we have Thomas Jefferson, who apparently built Monticello all by himself. That's all you see in the picture there. But to go by that history, and indeed others, you get the impression that the American Revolution was basically a tax revolt of rich white guys in white wigs. Mm-hmm. And that is not wrong. It's just incomplete.
Right.
The American Revolution involved all classes of society, but that is a story that is not, well, I was going to say not well told. Sometimes it's not told at all. Mm-hmm. Now, I realize the 7th grade history textbook is not going to include everything. No textbook, no history book can include everything. But if you read through this, there is no mention of really anyone else. Mm-hmm. There is not much mention of, small farmers and merchants. No mention of women, no mention of black Virginians, no mention of Native Americans, mm-hmm. all of whom were involved in the American Revolution in some way. Also no mention that there were a surprising number of loyalists to the crown. History is told by the winners, mm-hmm. and we conveniently write them out, but they were important at the time. So that leads to the other prop that I brought.
Okay.
And again, our audio listeners will just have to imagine this.
Yeah. Go to YouTube. It's on our YouTube channel.
This is sort of, in a way, the alternative history of that era, although that's sort of misleading. This is a book called Forced Founders, subtitled Indians, Debtors, Slaves, and the Making of the American Revolution in Virginia. written by Woody Holton. That name may sound familiar.
Yep.
Because he is the son of the late Virginia Governor Linwood Holton. Woody Holton, all of the Holton children went on to illustrious careers. Woody Holton is a historian, teaches at the University of South Carolina. Don't hold that against him. But he has won many awards for the books he has written about that era. And for our purposes, this is probably the most famous one because this really tells the rest of the story.
It was an attempt to be more inclusive and
Yes.
to as
Yes.
you said, it's not false what we've grown up learning. It's just an incomplete history, I think.
I would not call this revisionist history because none of this changes our understanding of what Washington did or what Jefferson did. But they did not act alone.
Well, we had Woody on for one of the pods early on when we started Cardinal News 250, the podcast in 2024. So, and that's because he has so much work, and we've written about it, in our new 250 newsletter and on that page on the website. So he's very well known in history circles. You and I were talking off mic. I asked you, I know you went to JMU, right?
I did.
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you anything funky. No, but
James Massing and I were there at the same time.
Exactly. Okay. No, but your major and your minor, because I asked you if you majored in history. You majored in poli-sci and minored in history?
Yes.
So I'm curious about, Dwayne, as this 250 project got underway and as you've been, putting together the content for those newsletters, is there anything in there that just totally surprised you? Basically, a student of history that you were like, I had no idea this happened.
Pretty much all of it.
Okay. Well,
And before I get to that answer, let me just say that my history professor at JMU was Dr. Raymond Dingledine Jr.,
okay.
who was one of the authors of my fourth grade Virginia history textbook. And he often talked about that because he used to joke that in later years, people felt that they were too flattering about the role of tobacco. How that was portrayed in the 60s when he wrote the book, was different than, how it was received later on.
Right.
But that aside, one of the surprising things to me, it has been I won't say very easy, but much easier than I thought to find out about the role of black Virginians in the Revolution, who were completely missing from most of our standard textbooks. But as you can tell from the subtitle of Woody Holton's book, constitute a big chunk of that. And black Virginians were involved in both ways, on both sides. We regard the last royal governor of Virginia was Lord Dunmore, and he's got a bad reputation in Virginia history. We ran him off. We changed the name of Dunmore County to Shenandoah County, and he is generally regarded as a bad figure in Virginia history, and for good reason in some ways. But historical figures are often very complicated. Lord Dunmore is very complicated. Lord Dunmore, as things got tense and rebellion was starting to happen, issued an Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves if they would come and support the British cause. And quite a few did. There were many others that sided on the Patriot side. And the reasons probably varied from person to person. But one of the more interesting stories, after the war, there were a lot of enslaved people who had been granted their freedom by the British who, were now in an uncomfortable position.
Right.
And many of those went to Nova Scotia.
Right.
Now part of Canada, which, that was a colony that had not joined the Revolution for various reasons. And so in Nova Scotia today, there is a Black Loyalist Heritage Center.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that.
A museum dedicated to the history of those former enslaved people not just from Virginia, but from all over, but many were from Virginia who went and settled in Nova Scotia. And
Well, one of the podcasts we did in 2024 was about that very thing because there was a great article in the 250 Project on it. And I got to talk to the director of that museum and a crucial board member there, just someone very involved, and they're direct descendants. They're descendants of some of these loyalists. So, and you can go back and listener and, look for that podcast. It's earlier, but it was fascinating to talk to them, to talk about their center, what's going on there, great visuals and really cool pictures of what they have there, but to talk to them about the work of keeping this narrative alive, educating people about this group of people who, as you said, they were kind of promised certain things to remain loyal and did not work out and then needed to go somewhere. So that's on my bucket list, by the way, is to go up to Nova Scotia and see that museum. But that's one example of just shining more of a light on people that didn't get a whole lot of attention when I was in school in these textbooks and so on and so forth. What's another one that you can think of? I'll interject here and say that I'm really drawn to the stories where it's just one person who's got this killer story. Susanna Bowling comes to mind, this young girl. Billy Flora comes to mind. Were those figures, and these are all available on previous podcasts and at Cardinal News, the 250 page, but were you aware of these figures?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. Let's talk about Billy Flora first.
Yeah.
Because we just talked about the enslaved people in Virginia who joined the Loyalist cause. There were many others who joined the Patriot cause. Billy Flora is actually a free black man.
A businessman.
We forget that aspect of history. At the Battle of Great Bridge in Hampton Roads, British were trying to march across a bridge. He was the lone sentry that held off the British for a while. So the hero of the Battle of Great Bridge.
He had to stand there for a while and reload. And one of the things my guest, Dr. Bakari, talked about was, okay, stop for a minute, because it's really easy to dismiss and brush that part of the narrative. Oh, he fired several shots. Well, wait, stop. In those days, the time it took to stand and fire several shots meant reloading and standing there being vulnerable. So he tells this great story about it. And when you stop and think about it, like, this is pretty dramatic stuff.
Yeah. So, that was a completely new story to me. I mean, once we really got past the first few stories, it's all new to me in some ways.
So I mentioned Susanna Bowling. 17 years old, maybe? Is
16.
That it? Okay.
16. She was a 16-year-old girl from the Hopewell area who may have saved Lafayette from being captured by the British. There is not particularly good documentation of what she may or may not have done. All of this has been passed down through oral tradition, so it's more in the realm of legend. But lots of things weren't documented then. But as the story goes, the British were in her neighborhood. Lafayette was on the other side of the river. She overheard the British talking about how they planned to capture him. Because,
were they in her house? Weren't they couldn't they come in?
Possibly. I would have to.
Me too. We didn't look at our notes, guys. Sorry.
Yeah.
we're going on recall
but
here.
they were certainly camped out at her family's farm, and the British paid no attention to a 16-year-old girl who had good ears and good insight, and so she heard the plan, and that night she got on her horse and rode to Lafayette and alerted him, and he was able to avoid capture. So in some ways, she was our Paul Revere.
Right.
She rode further, and you can debate whether which had the more impact. But had Lafayette been captured, that would have been a big blow to the Patriot cause and a big deal to the British. So, assuming that story is true, we don't know if it is. But we like to think it is.
Well, and every time we do one of these articles, if we don't know for sure, that's obviously talked about, and just what documentation is there, what's the controversy about the documentation, and we talked about that in the pod with an author. That's who I was talking to, was the author who had written a book about Susanna Bowling. This is starting to sound like a greatest hits episode, which was not not my intention per se, but it's just to point out that all the interesting characters who come to light when you start looking, when you intentionally are looking for them. And we have a great stable of freelance reporters who you work with to go and cover these various figures in Virginia history and the nation's history.
And you mentioned documentation. A lot of the documentation of that era comes from the Virginia Gazette, which is the newspaper in Williamsburg. Now, there were actually multiple newspapers called the Virginia Gazette. We won't get into.
Well, we did a podcast on that too, just so you know.
Yeah,
We've covered it all, Dwayne.
This is the greatest hits. But the owner of the Virginia Gazette at a key point in time was Clementina Rand, first woman to publish a newspaper in Virginia. That made her very influential because that was the newspaper of the time, and that is where a lot of the history was documented, but that is also where a lot of the history took place in terms of the reporting and letters and what today we would call op-eds, opinion pieces. Right. All flowed through that newspaper.
You got to go back in, I think it was January of this year. The Virginia 250 Mobile Museum sort of debuted in Roanoke, and there was a big ceremony, and you got to go there, and you were on it. It's a truck that opens out. I mean, I'd never heard of a mobile museum before, seen one. And what was it like? Oh, first of all, you did post pictures on our website, so people can go look at that. But what was that like? It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. Picture a tractor trailer with the trailer part having been transformed into a museum. You enter through a door, and throughout there are various exhibits, short films, and many of those focus on some of these little-known characters. Some of which I was not aware of, and we now have stories in progress on some of these.
Cool, yeah.
We were just talking about Clementina Rand and Susanna Bowling, another woman who played a role in that era. I forget her name right now, but the British were big on burning courthouses because that was a way to really impact the community. It was to get rid of all the legal records. One of those was in Isle of Wight County, and the wife of one of the deputy clerks spirited out the paperwork from the courthouse and had it buried to save that county's records.
Great. Cool story. Very dramatic, like I said. So we're about a year out from from July 2026, which is the pinnacle moment that we've been leading up to. We've covered so many different things already in the project. Are there things coming up that you can tease about that you're excited about?
Well, I'm excited about all of them. I suppose the ones that I'm most excited about are the ones I didn't know anything about. There were draft resistors in those days. There were draft rags. We have story coming on that. There was a British, I forget his formal title, Henry Hamilton, but he was in charge of the British forts in what we now what was then called the Northwest. He was in Detroit, because we indicated at the beginning Virginia claimed everything west, so that was part of Virginia then. He got captured and wound up being sent to Jefferson, Governor Jefferson in Virginia then, who had to figure out what to do with the fellow. There's much controversy about that. That was a story didn't know anything about. We have stories on particular people coming up. Yeah, I did not realize, and here's a way to connect things to the modern day. There's a big British prisoner of war camp near Charlottesville. I say British, I mean, it's where Americans were holding British prisoners. Actually, mostly German prisoners, who were fighting for the British. But anyone who's been to Charlottesville is familiar with Barracks Road Shopping Center.
Yeah.
The barracks comes from the reference to that prisoner of war camp.
I didn't know that.
And that was actually a big target for the British because they saw all these, all of their men being held there. It's like, man, if we can capture that, and, free those people, we increase our numbers. So there was a lot of British interest in, trying to get to Albemarle County and free those folks.
Very cool. Very cool. I should mention, some of the stories that we've done have been stories that someone pitched to you. Someone out in the community or someone whose business is history somehow. Maybe they're a museum director or an educator. So we're very open to people who have an idea about something that probably most people don't know about with someone, in Virginia and the impact leading into the Revolution. And I should also say, it's not that we ignore the well-known stories. We did a lot with the 250th anniversary of the Patrick Henry, the famous speech he gave, "Give me liberty or give me death." There was a lot around that, of course, in Virginia, but obviously we talked about that as well. If people want to give an idea to you, Dwayne, I mean, I know you're open to it. So, and I know we also have that opportunity in the newsletter itself, right?
Yeah.
How can people do that?
The simplest address to remember is news@cardinalnews.org.
Okay.
That will get to me and lots of other people. And yes, many, when we started, there were a handful of stories that I knew that maybe the general public did not. And started researching others, but many others have come, hey, you ought to do a story on this. The thing on the prisoner of war camp at Barracks Road in Charlottesville, I knew nothing about until we did another story on a spy from Bogota County.
Right.
Who
Is this the John Wyatt thing?
That's the John Wyatt story. And Michael Hudson of Historic Smithfield in Montgomery County mentioned the prisoner of war camp, so that led there.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to all the people who contribute to Cardinal News 250, because without, these people willing to be interviewed or sending along ideas and sharing their knowledge, I'm thinking of some people like when we had Garrett Channel of the Salem Museum talking about Andrew Lewis, which is a figure everyone hears about and sees around here, but like, who is he really? What did he do? All those kinds of things. So thanks to everyone for contributing, because it is a kind of a community and a statewide project at this point. Well, Dwayne, we've got lots more to go as we continue following along the history of our nation, especially as it relates to Virginia figures and people playing a part in that. So thank you for sitting down for this pod. We'll probably have you on again for 250 before it's all said and done. And they can also email you as well directly, correct?
Yes.
Dwayne
at cardinalnews.org.
DWAYNE.
Correct.
All right. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for listening to the Cardinal News 250 podcast. We're sponsored by Bank of Botetourt, focused on you. This project is made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission. And I would like to thank also our Sherry Quinley and Zach Shelton for their support in this podcast. You can find all of our paywall-free news at cardinalnews.org. I'm Dutchie Jesse.
Thanks for listening to Cardinal 250, made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission. For more information on Cardinal News 250, including the Cardinal 250 and other newsletters, visit cardinalnews.org.